So I think that Mariah said just before she read the scripture that it is a favorite. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is definitely a favorite. It's one of those stories that we find in children's Bibles and that we tell in Sunday school and that we kind of grow up with, that shows up in scripture readings in worship and in scripture readings in youth groups and in scripture readings on mission trips and in scripture readings kind of everywhere else. So we know it really well. And we know what it means really well. And the challenge with things that we know really well is that we can know them so well we don't quite pay attention to what's going on in them. We just kind of let the words wash over us because we already know what they say. So I want to take this parable and the frame to this parable a little more slowly than usual so that we can be a little more surprised by this thing that we know so well. So the parable of the Good Samaritan has this frame around it. Jesus is talking to someone who has some questions, who's trying to get one over on him. And the frame starts, I'm going to cut off a little bit at the beginning, but starts with a commandment and a question. And the commandment is, love your neighbor as yourself. And the question is, what now? Really? I mean, I take care of myself. I make sure that I have a nice, secure, warm, safe place to live. I should make sure that my neighbor has a nice, secure, warm place to live. I make sure that I've got a job that pays enough, that I have enough to live and enough to enjoy life. I should make sure that my neighbor has enough to live and enough to enjoy life. I have good health insurance. I can go to the doctor when I need to go to the doctor. I should make sure my neighbor can go to the doctor when they need to go to the doctor. I should make sure someone takes care of my neighbor's lawn and weeds my neighbor's flower beds and paints my neighbor's house. I should make sure that my neighbor has a car and can get where they need to go. I should make sure that my neighbor can get groceries. I should make sure that my neighbor can... That feels like a lot. So who exactly is my neighbor? And in response, Jesus tells this story. A man was on his way from, let's say, DeWitt to Davenport. And while he was traveling along the road, he was set upon by bandits who robbed him and beat him and left him for dead. And after a while, a pastor came by. A very well-known pastor, a pastor with a nice big church, a pastor who was an important figure in their community, everyone respected. And the pastor saw the man out of the corner of his eye and passed on by. Then a little while later, a politician came along. A politician who talked a big game about Iowa nice and the kind of neighborliness we have here in this agricultural area where if a farmer's having trouble, the farmers down the street will come and help out. And the politician passed right by. And then this guy came along. I'm not sure what the modern analog is to a Samaritan. Different people in different times have used different ideas, but here's the important thing about a Samaritan. They're kind of like us, but definitely not us. They're the person who, well, if you saw them at a distance and you didn't talk to them, you'd think, oh, one of us. But if you started chatting with them, if you got up close, if you heard the accent, if you saw the food that they eat, if you knew their customs, you'd go, not quite one of us. The kind of outsider who we're the most afraid of because they can get inside so easily. So that person comes along and sees the man on the side of the road and immediately runs over to him and starts caring for him, makes sure he's okay, stabilizes him, does CPR, dresses his wounds, all that kind of stuff, and then takes him and puts him in his own car and takes him someplace where he will be safe, to an inn, to a hotel, and gets him in there and cares for him, makes sure that he is okay, does everything that he can, and stays there for an entire night by this man's side. And then, in the morning, goes to the owner of the hotel and gives him, if I'm doing the math right, 2 days' wages. Do that math in your head. And says, use this. Get this man anything that he needs. I think I've got him okay. I think he just needs some bed rest and he'll be fine. But if he needs anything else, use this and then use whatever you have. And I'm going to be coming this way again. So when I come back, if you spend any more than what I'm giving you now, I will reimburse you. No questions asked. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. And then, this parable of the Good Samaritan, the frame that it's in, ends with a question and a command. Who was the neighbor to the man who got robbed and beaten and left for dead? And the answer is the one who showed him mercy. It's tempting to stop there, to end with the question and the answer and not go on to the commandment. I've seen commentaries that do that. I once read a little thing by a guy about the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he was just trying to get the answer to who is my neighbor, and came up with, my neighbors are the people who show me mercy. I have to do a lot for my neighbors, but my neighbors are the ones who have done something for me first. So yeah, the man who was beaten and robbed and left for dead owes the Samaritan a lot, but only the Samaritan a lot. And that means I don't have to do very much for anyone. The problem is that the frame ends with the question, and a commandment. And the commandment is, go and do likewise. And that adds a twist. It turns things a little bit, because Jesus doesn't mean travel along the road from DeWitt to Davenport and get robbed and beaten and left for dead. Jesus means go and show mercy. Go and make neighbors. Go and make neighbors. If you see someone on the side of the road, help them. If you see someone who is in need, help them. If you see someone who is hungry, feed them. If you see someone who is lonely, welcome them. If you see someone who is thirsty, give them something to drink. If you see someone who is homeless, invite them into your home. If you see someone who needs anything, give them what they need. Show mercy. Make them your neighbor. Love them. And how do we do that? I've just listed a few ways, but now we need to go back to that bit in the story where the Samaritan who found a stranger hands over 2 days' wages and says, if there's anything else you need, I'll cover that too. We've been talking about the things that make us human, about this new life that Jesus invites us into, this resurrected life, this abundant life, this life in God's reign of love. Today we're talking about charity, which you probably know is one of my favorite topics. I should have brought my book to hold up. Charity is another word for love. It comes from Latin, caritas, love. And that Latin word was used to translate a Greek word, agape, the kind of love that God has for humanity, the kind of God that Christ has, the kind of love that Christ has for creation, the kind of love that would lead Christ to set aside glory and become one of us, even to the cross and to the tomb and to the resurrection. Charity is love, and we are called to love, to reckless love, to dangerous love, to the kind of love that would lead us to see someone in need and hand over 2 days' wages and offer reimbursement for anything else besides. If you go back and read ancient documents, ancient descriptions of Christians, descriptions by Christians, descriptions by people who were not Christians, one of the things that they marvel at is the love that these people have for one another. The kind of love that means no one among them wants for anything. The kind of love where they take care of widows and orphans, no questions asked. The kind of love where they invite immigrants to stay with them and embrace them as brothers and sisters and siblings. People marvel at the love that Christians have. And Christians themselves say, how do people know that we are Christians? Well, by our love. And people look at the Christians and say, they're nuts. And the Christians look at themselves and say, yeah, we're kind of nuts. But we're trying this new thing. We're trying this new life. We're trying this abundant life. We're trying this life of abundance. We're trying this thing that no one has done before since the very beginning. This thing where we care about each other. This thing where we are the kind of people who, if we see someone on the side of the road, we go and make them our neighbor by showing them mercy. And given how much mercy God has shown us, we can show each other and everyone else a lot. The story of the Good Samaritan, it's not just a story about being nice to each other. It's not just a story about being kind of generically neighborly. It is a story, like so many other stories in the gospel, about being so radically loving that people look and go, what is wrong with them? How can someone be this loving? How can someone be this caring? How can someone make neighbors this easily? And that is what Jesus is calling us to do. Look at this Samaritan. Look at this person who is, not one of us, but kind of close enough to be scary, different enough to be scary, and see what they can do, and go and do likewise. Go and show mercy. Go and make neighbors. Because if we can make neighbors, if we can make enough neighbors, then we'll all be neighbors. And we'll all have that charity, that caritas, that agape, that love. And we'll all have enough and more than enough. And we'll all be cared for when we need care. And wouldn't that be a wonderful world? Wouldn't that be a restored and repaired world? Wouldn't that be an abundant life? So when we hear they showed mercy, we should go and do likewise.